so often confuse sex trafficking with prostitution. Sex trafficking, as defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, is the exchange of a commercial sex act for anything of value through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. But in the case of minor victims, you do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. No child is ever a prostitute. Our brains have a very difficult time accepting that human trafficking can exist in our communities. When we are confronted with difficult situations, when we are feeling vulnerable, our brains need a story to help us understand how to protect ourselves. So my question to you tonight is, what is the story you tell yourself about human trafficking? Often, the story we tell ourselves is not my child, not my community. But I want this thought to resonate with you. Every child can be a victim of human trafficking. It does not matter their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, what community they live in, or what school they attend. All our children are at risk of being trafficked.
Good evening. Welcome to Real Talk with Jean Price, and I'm glad you tuned in tonight. This is going to be probably one of the heaviest shows we have put together. We have two wonderful guests that are going to be joining us. This show is going to be not only enlightening, but it's going to be thought-provoking. We're going to talk about this subject, sex trafficking, and bring some clarity and bring another perspective. There are many children out there that have been exploited by adults. Many children out there that have found themselves in situations that they didn't necessarily want to be in. How do we, as a people, band together to go out there and help children that have suffered with such a traumatic thing happening in their life? Well, tonight, I have my two wonderful, wonderful guests, and they are people of passion and purpose to help us understand what we are facing in a world like today. The United Nations defines human trafficking as a recruitment, a transportation, or a transfer. And there are so many girls and boys out there that need to know that there's a voice that can speak and that there's an ear that can be heard, and that there are people out there that are willing to help them. Ladies and gentlemen, to my viewing audience tonight, help me welcome my guest, Caitlin Silvers, to the screen right now.
Hello, Ms. Price. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Caitlin. How are you? It's so good to see you.
I'm doing wonderful. It's so good to see you too.
Thank you for joining us tonight on Real Talk. As you see the title, we talk tonight about something that's so real. I need you to tell us a little bit about yourself before we engage ourselves in the conversation.
Yeah, so my name is Caitlin. I live in the Sunshine State of Florida. I moved to Florida. It'll be 5 years in June. And, I had always heard about sex trafficking. And when I moved to Tampa, it really, I just became aware of how bad it really is. Tampa is 12th in the nation. Florida is 3rd in the country of sex trafficking. So, moving to Tampa is really where this passion and this topic was brought to my attention. And I was like, I have to do something about it. So I'm really grateful to be here chatting with you tonight.
That's awesome. I have another guest that's going to be joining us as well, and her name is Natasha Williams. I'm going to ask her if she would be so kind if they can bring her in, because we want to really engage in this conversation tonight. Okay, while they are getting their
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for being on Real Talk with Jean Price. I'm glad you can join Caitlin with me tonight. Thank you both for being on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Natasha?
Yes, absolutely. So born and raised in Southeast Queens, from the community. I've been working in government for over the last decade. My glare is like crazy, so let me just be blind. I've been working in government for the last decade, advocating for communities of color as the chief of staff and also executive director for the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus. I'm currently a candidate for a New York City Council, which in the 27th Council District, which covers the areas of Cambria Heights, Queens Village, Hollis, St. Albans, parts of Springfield Gardens, and parts of Jamaica. And for me, this is about our communities and how we ensure that people in our communities can have a great quality of life and not subject to harm. So looking to kind of minimize harm and increase opportunities, and just appreciate you having me on your show today. And I just came from outside knocking on doors, so sorry if I'm like all over the place.
It's okay. Listen, we're here. We're just talking, and it's great. Thank you again both for being on the show. Caitlin is from Tampa, and of course, you're here in New York where I am. But this is such a topic that is so real, no matter where we are. And the truth is, with even everything going on in the world, Caitlin and Natasha, is colorblind. It has no color. You don't see color when it comes to sex trafficking. So I'm going to start with you, Caitlin. Can you kind of share with the audience and with Natasha and I, what are some of the misconceptions that's out there about sex trafficking?
Oops, I'm muted. I think the promo, the intro video just really touched on it perfectly. I think there's a lot of ickiness that surrounds sex trafficking. And, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, everyone's seen the movie Taken. And so there's this misconception of you're getting kidnapped and you're being taken across, into international countries. And you're going to these dark, dark warehouses, and you're just scooped up from your life and taken away. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that trafficking, it's a lot more subtle. It's a hidden crime. It's something that, to be honest, it could happen to everyone. I've worked with so many survivors, and their stories are like, wow, this could be my aunt. This could be me. And I think another one is that, these people, they want to do it, right? You see the prostitutes walking down the street, or the strippers in the strip club. And the show's Real Talk, so I'm just going to be real. The misconception is that they want to do it. And in reality, no one is born. No one wants to, be used for sex and exploited in that way. And it's just a very slow psychological crime, and it just progresses over time, and it could really impact anyone, anywhere, at any time. You can just be one bad life situation away from being involved in it. So I think there's so many, and I'm really happy, to share with people about just kind of, explode the misconceptions and make it more real.
Yes. Thank you for that. Natasha, I have a question for you. How does somebody wind up in sex trafficking? And I don't want to make it gender specific, but does it seem like it happened more to girls than to boys or women and or men?
I think that more women are subject to sex trafficking than men. But I will say that there has been, and I've heard a lot of different stories about the LGBTQIA community also being subject to various forms of. Also, another thing with the term sex trafficking, like, I think some people think of the things that you see on TV, and sometimes like how sex trafficking can be categorized isn't this like huge ring. Sometimes it's just simply someone being forced to do something, not with free will. And so I know that the LGBTQIA community, there's been a lot of cases, especially with trans women, also sort of being forced into sex work. And so, I do think it's primarily women. And I think you asked me another question: how does it happen?
Yes.
It's interesting because I think it happens in different ways. No one story is the same. They're all unique. But one thing that I think they all sort of have a thread is it kind of like starts with some type of lie, some type of manipulation. And then you find yourself in a situation that's really difficult to get out of. So I'll say that a lot of times it starts with some type of lie, some type of form of manipulation.
Yes, yes. You know, it's so interesting. You both brought up some interesting points. I was sexually abused as a child. And when you even said that about manipulation, and, you know, that's something that even happens in the mind, even for victims like, you know, that, because it's something that the perpetrator says to the person to get their minds to change, or they enter into the mind part of it. And for me, when I understood what was happening, because I was young until I became a teenager, but nonetheless, the barriers that were in place in my mind were torn down. What I thought was normal, what he was doing to me, it became normal, though it wasn't normal. And I'm so glad both of you are helping us understand the misconception, because it's true. I'm thinking that, you know, somebody scoops you up in a van and take you down and you're in another country, you know, different things like that. And Caitlin, one of the things I found out was that Florida is ranked third behind California and Texas. How can that be?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways people enter trafficking. One, Florida is one of the worst states. Tampa is one of the worst cities in the nation for foster care. And actually, Florida has more care, Tampa has more kids in foster care per capita than Fort Lauderdale and Miami. And so when kids are in the foster care system, they are like 60% of kids in trafficking come from the child welfare system or foster homes. So you look at it like that, and you know, these kids are just being scooped up. And so, one, just the prevalence of kids in the foster system here. Number two, we are a port city, so you look at the things that are coming in. There are, you know, people moving to Tampa. It's an immigration city. There are ports that are bringing things in from different countries. We are a tourism state, so we have the beaches. We have an NFL team. We have an NHL team. All of those things bring, and they really don't just bring, they breed strip clubs, trafficking, prostitution, you know, people wanting to buy sex for enjoyment while they're on vacation or they're enjoying themselves. And so I think it's just like this, I hate to say, this perfect storm of all these different things that are just kind of fueling this fire of trafficking here in Tampa. And it's really just mind blowing.
What they call it?
I'm sorry, you cut out for just a moment. What did you say?
I was saying to Natasha, here in New York, we have what they call the red light district, right? I don't know. Can you
You
hear
said we
me?
have the red light district?
Yes. Is that where a lot of sex trafficking is?
I actually am not. I know that there's in different boroughs, there are always
Okay.
areas where, you know, sex trafficking might happen. But again, I think, especially even now with COVID, like you don't really see people like walking the streets as much as
Okay.
you would in the past, right? But like there were historic areas where this might have taken place back in the day, like Hunts Point in the Bronx, or you know, South Road in Queens, you know, the Village, you know, in the city, as another example. But I'm not saying that it doesn't exist there. I'm saying it doesn't, you can't visually see it
I understand. Yes.
as much as you probably could have visually seen it before, which is kind of tricky, right? Because I think sex trafficking has become harder because it's so underground. And so I think historically, when you know people were on the streets and you know it was like the 80s and the 70s, I think it was easy to sort of like create a map, right? Like you know what's
Right. I
happening
understand.
here and
Yeah.
you can target the pimps here. But now it's not like that. It's kind of exactly, you know, what was just mentioned. It's, you know, hey, I might have with in my own free will wanted to be a stripper, but I might have met someone in a strip club that said, oh, if I, go to this party to make extra money, I can make extra money going to this party and doing some other things, or it might happen right in the strip club. And then, they may do that act, right? And then maybe they're asked to do another act until, hey, maybe I don't want to do this anymore, right? And then it's like, wait, what? You don't want to do what anymore? You're going to go do this. Like and that's just one example, because it can really happen so many different ways. And I think, again, depending on how you enter it is also interesting, because if you're an immigrant woman, there's a different type of connotation, a different type of control that others are able to have over you. If you are someone who is a poor woman, right? Like if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of family and support. So I think it really depends on like who the person is and how you may enter into this particular unfortunate situation. So I'm thinking of the situation that happened in Georgia. I've been seeing a few things that was saying like they didn't say that they were being trafficked, but they were saying that they possibly were sex workers, right? And we know that and I don't know this is not fact.
Right.
I just happened to see, get everything from the internet now. I just happened to see a few tweets and a few Instagram posts about the possibility of what they might have also been doing. And we know that massage parlors is another location for such activity, right? And so, if you came to this country getting a job and you know that like this job is kind of like the only place for you, this is all that you kind of get stuck in this cycle. And so I'm just bringing up different examples about how these things happen and how pervasive it is, because it's really, really hard to track nowadays.
Wow. That's very interesting. And it is true. I like the point you brought up that is visually, you don't see things the way they used to be. And I think like we're all saying even tonight, and especially in light of COVID, you wouldn't even know what's going on. Things are so underground, things are so undercover, even more than they were before. But yet it's still so prevalent in the world that we're dealing with today. How does somebody get out of it, Caitlin? How does somebody, what Natasha was saying, say they just got caught up in, like you said, they just went out on a date and then they got caught up in it, but then how do they get out of it?
Yeah, I think so. I work with a lot of local organizations here. Tampa has many, many wonderful organizations, and the statistic is that it takes them 7 contacts with a woman before they are even ready to talk about getting out of the life. So that's what we refer to it as. We call it, you're not a prostitute, you're in the life. And so it takes them 7 points of contact to get out of the life. And so if you think about it, a woman is walking the streets or she's out, in a club, like you don't know how long the 7 contacts will be over. Maybe it's 7 months, maybe it's years. And so it'll take those 7 points of contact before they even start to ask questions like, so why an organization I work with, they work to bring hygiene items to women in the street. So they'll go out at 2 a.m. They will bring them hygiene bags. They'll go out into the clubs. They bring them gift bags, make them just feel loved, let them know they're loved, give them a gift, talk to them. And so they're kind of like, well, why are you giving me this? Like, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me? And, oh, okay, you work for this organization. Okay, maybe a few more times. Well, what do you do? What does this organization do? Oh, okay. And so it's a really, really slow process. The organizations have to be very patient. They have to meet the women where they're at, because the second they start to feel any judgment or they start to feel pushed in any way, that could totally just take them off track. So I think the biggest thing to get people out of the life is just getting out into the community and meeting not just women, because, to your point, it happens to everybody, but meeting people where they're at, loving them, giving them resources, giving them an out. And I think above that, we're in a supply and demand world. So beyond that, like if there's no demand for it, we don't need a supply. So I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because if we get rid of the demand, then we won't need as high of a supply. People won't be trafficked as often. So I think that's another really important piece of the conversation. So yeah, overall, you just loving people, and the more people know about this, the more people are aware, the more people can recognize it, the more people can report it, and then we're saving, the people that are in those lives.
Yeah. Natasha, is fear a huge factor in helping people get out?
I missed part of what you said. Fear,
Is
did you say
fear
fear?
like a person of being afraid, maybe afraid of the person that got them in it, or afraid that life won't be what it is, even though life is bad in it? Do you think fear plays a major role?
Oh yeah, 100%. And it can be, fear can take on different forms. It could be fear of the person, it could be fear of life after this life,
Yes.
because it
Right.
then kind of becomes your new normal. And like you said, as someone who has been assaulted, there was a bit of manipulation. And so, what you thought was normal was in fact not normal, but you cannot
Mhm.
see beyond that. And so I think there's many fears that go into someone not being able to escape that lifestyle. Maybe it's fear of not being able to make money, right? This is the only way that they've gotten accustomed to making money and to taking care of themselves. Because the interesting thing about some forms of sex trafficking is there's like a little bit of independence to it. Like, you're not like I mean, maybe I'm sure there are different scenarios where people are like legit slaves, right? Where it's like you can't go nowhere. I'm sure there's a situation like that somewhere in the United
Right.
States. But again, for some of these situations, it's almost like an invisible thread in some of these situations where like they maintain a level of independence. And so when you think about this idea of independence, this idea of taking care of yourself, well, if you stop doing this thing, you might not be able to take care of yourself. And so I think there's many fears, and I think that the fear is fueled by a wide range of reasons.
Wow, that's interesting. So say, for instance, you like Caitlin mentioned, she belongs to an organization. Of course, you, Natasha, you're out there in the community. You both are. What are some of the flags? Like, what are some of the things to look for? I remember, like, my husband and I went on vacation. Of course, this is pre-COVID, before things got crazy. And this is probably wrong for me to have this misconception, but nonetheless, I remember going, you get up, you're at the resort and you're at breakfast. And it was an older man sitting with a younger woman, and it wasn't his daughter. You could tell at, say, breakfast. And for me, I don't know why, in my mind, I remember looking, saying something about that just didn't look right. You're just looking like it just, it just didn't seem, I don't know, I couldn't put my finger on it. And what are some of the red flags like that you look for? Because suppose it could have been that young lady that wanted to get out, but she couldn't get out because she was afraid. What do we look for as, people that are not, you guys have a great awareness of this particular topic. What was somebody like myself before? And of course, I can't assume that was the case, but it could have been. What do we look for, Caitlin?
Yeah, I think one, in situations like that, like we're gifted intuition, right? So when we have these moments of like something just feels wrong, something feels kind of icky about that, like maybe I should just report that because something is not right. I do think that there are many situations and scenarios where it is much older men with younger women. Not that it's every situation. I don't
Right.
want to say that. But that is something that's very common. I think, what are someone's working conditions or their living conditions? Is their home unstable? Like, do they have a place to lay their head at night? Do they not? For a job, are they working really weird hours? Do they, have a whole lot of debt? Are they working to pay off something? Are they taxed something somehow? Are they, paid? Do they maybe have really, really nice clothes and stuff, but they're not paid very well? A lot of, pimps and traffickers, they will, that's one of the, manipulation factors that Natasha was touching on is I'm taking care of your security. I'm taking care of your needs. I'm giving you,
Yes.
but it's still just something isn't right. Mental health, of course, physical health. Are there signs of physical abuse? Are there signs of sexual abuse? You know, I met a survivor. This was maybe 3 years ago, and she was a woman on the street. She was actively in the life. We were doing an outreach. We invited her in for, you know, free brunch. We gave them clothes if they need it. We hung out. We just hung out. We were just women, just chilling together. And she walked up with a man who was older. He was dressed very, very nicely. She was, you know, her makeup was smeared. Her clothes were dirty. And, you know, she said, well, what is this? And we're like, yeah, free clothes, you know, having a good time. And she looked at her boyfriend. She was very timid, very quiet, looked at her boyfriend, as she referred to him, and said, well, it's women only. And he just kind of looked at her like this. And so they kept on and walked away, and they ended up coming back. But you could tell there was a fear there. I think, what is someone's like relationship dynamics? Because very frequently victims and survivors look at this person as their boyfriend. You know, it's their pimp, it's their trafficker, but they call him their boyfriend. Do they have control of their mouth, their stuff, their possessions, their living arrangements? You know, branding, that's really big here in Tampa, is that victims, kids, women will be branded with a tattoo of some sort. So it might be the pimp. It might be a barcode. It could be anything. You know, I've seen like a crown with the pimp's name underneath it. And so I think things like that, you know, is their story making sense? They're trying to tell you a story, but does it make sense? Is it adding up? Do they know where they're at? Do they not know where they're at? Do they know that they're in Tampa? Do they know that they're in New York?
Right.
There's so many different things to look for. And I think one of the biggest things is, if you see something, say something. If something feels icky, you know, like I read a book a long time ago called The Gift of Fear, and it talked about the gift of fear and the gift of intuition. And those things are very telling. And so if you see something that feels wrong, it's probably wrong.
Wow. And what do you feel, Natasha, here in New York? I mean, you know, even, and let me just say this, as you guys even talking, I feel such a heaviness in my heart, because I know what it's like to be a victim on one perspective of being violated, but to hear you guys bring such truth and enlightenment to other women and or men, it's really heart-wrenching for me to hear this. And I guess because I have the kind of heart that I don't want to see people suffer and go through things like that. Is it kind of similar even here in New York in the community work that you do, Natasha?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the things that Caitlin mentioned are similar, but I don't think that they're as intense as what she described, or at least I have not seen it in the localized area that we live in. I think, you know, on this end, I think it is more of that sort of invisible thread. But I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, because it might exist. I just think it's so like deep undercover that it's really difficult to identify. But all the things that Caitlin mentioned, if you do come across somebody that sort of looks or is acting suspiciously based off of, I have nothing else to add to what Caitlin said, like, you know, that is something that you might want to take a second look at and potentially, you know, say something about.
Definitely, definitely. We're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to have our viewing audience. They have been chiming in. Callers has said, you know, this topic is so dear to her because this is an area in her life where she feels that, you know, she has that passion like the two of you do. But after the commercial break, we'll be right back, and we're going to talk some more about what's it like to be faced with someone has dealt with sex trafficking. We'll be right back. Have you been enjoying the show? Make sure you comment and like. Tell us what you want to talk about. It might be featured on the next Real Talk with Jean Price.
So often confuse sex trafficking with prostitution. Sex trafficking, as defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, is the exchange of a commercial sex act for anything of value through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. But in the case of minor victims, you do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. No child is ever a prostitute. Our brains have a very difficult time accepting that human trafficking can exist in our communities. When we are confronted with difficult situations, when we are feeling vulnerable, our brains need a story to help us understand how to protect ourselves. So my question to you tonight is, what is the story you tell yourself about human trafficking? Often, the story we tell ourselves is not my child, not my community. But I want this thought to resonate with you. Every child can be a victim of human trafficking. It does not matter their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, what community they live in, or what school they attend. All our children are at risk of being trafficked.
Wow. Wow. Every time I see the promo video that has been posted for those that are watching the show tonight, I'm normally, we're like telling people chime in in the chat, and I want the viewing audience to do that. But this is such a heavy show, and there are people out there, and I hope you're listening to these two wonderful guests that are with us tonight, helping us to see that whether in New York or Florida, it's so real. It's so real. Every time I see that commercial where it says, it brings up a child on a commercial, do you know where your child is, or have you seen this particular child? The likelihood or the probability or possibility is that child could be caught up in something similar to dealing with sex trafficking. And it is so real, it's so heavy. So I'm going to invite my guests to come on back to the show as we continue to talk about this. Both ladies are just phenomenal, bringing some enlightenment again to what we need to be continue to talk about. And I hope people are really listening to what you all both are saying tonight, because it's so real, and it's just real. And when you think about how children do not get a chance to live, and I think that's what bothers me more than anything, is that here it is. I feel like no one has a right to, and I like what it was in the promo that talked about, no one has a right to devalue someone else. Because we are all of value. God made us all of value. And for someone to come and violate shows that that person devalues another human being. And I think that is so, that really just gets to me very, very much so. So I want to go back into, let me go back to Natasha for a second. How did you get involved in the sense of how did it become your passion? Because I heard Bishop Jake say this, and I give him full credit. He said, you follow your passion, you'll find your purpose. And it's apparent that the two of you have found your purpose in what you're doing. How did it turn out for you, Natasha? How did it come to being?
Yeah, so I have always wanted to do something bigger than myself. I really thought, just when I was younger, when you're younger, I feel like they try to force you into these different career fields. Like, what do you want to be? A doctor,
Right.
a lawyer? And so I always used to say I wanted to be a judge, after like reading one little story about Thurgood Marshall and thinking that was really cool, that he was able to, fight on behalf of, Black children, right? And many other things. But that was like the most famous, Black history story that I had read about. And so wanted to kind of like be this judge, and then I found out that you kind of have to go to law school to be a judge, and so then it changed to I want to be a lawyer and like help people in need and like get them to help them to seek justice. And then I was like, actually I want to go law school, and so when I decided to go to grad school, I got the opportunity to work for the New York State Legislature. And then when I got there, I'm like, so all of these different things that I want to have a positive effect on, whether it's, sex trafficking, criminal justice reform, quality education, all of these things, these sort of these civil and human rights things that I've always been passionate about, there is a space in the legislative body to make change, if only it functioned properly. I don't really think we live in a functioning democracy. And
Right.
so I've always wanted to that really has motivated me to want to change the culture and face of government to be a functioning democracy, to actually speak to the needs of the people and enact laws and policy that will have positive impacts and minimize or eliminate harm, right? So because this topic is sex trafficking as an example, like what does it look like to ensure there are policies in place to minimize and or eliminate sex trafficking from even happening in our communities? And so just this idea of understanding a place of power and a place of change and wanting to really affect that place is sort of, you know, what has led me to be in this space and work in government for over the last decade, and even, you know, tell myself I should run for office. So yeah, that's what kind of has got me into this world, in this work.
Wow, that's beautiful, and I see that smile that came out when you were really talking about it. That's awesome. That, and you know, I love the fact that both of you are making a difference because you want to make a difference. It's different to me when you doing something and you really don't want to do it, but I'm grateful for the fact that you have the heart to want to make a difference. Caitlin, going back to you and dealing with what's going on, excuse me, in Tampa, what are some of the other organizations that you merge with to work with victims from sex trafficking?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's a lot locally to Tampa. So one of them is called Created Women. So they do a lot of street outreach. They do a lot of club outreach. It's a faith-based community. They have emergency housing. They have long-term housing. It's a sanctuary program for long-term care. They are really, really wonderful advocates in the community, and there are many like them. There's actually the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. It's a national organization, but their headquarters are based in Tampa. And they have the first actually boys rescue home in just outside of Tampa. So they're the first ones to ever open that up. So they're a really wonderful organization based. They do a lot of advocacy work, awareness work. There's also a couple really great ones, again, local, but I feel like every city has them if you search it. There's a organization called the Freedom Network. They're kind of like a hub, and what they do is serve as like the center of the hub for law enforcement and, you know, victim-based things and policy workers like Natasha. And so they kind of just want to bring all the pieces. Wow. So there's a lot of really, really, really wonderful organizations here locally, and there's, you know, great ones nationally too. Like I mentioned, U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. A21 is one that's worldwide, but I do really recommend for anyone that wants to get plugged in. I think there's such a important work that happens. I work in nonprofit full time. There's a really important work that happens on the local level. And every city, like we've been talking, is so different. And so those organizations can really serve the needs of the local community, the local women, and the local situations that are happening.
One of the things that I notice as I'm talking to the two of you, and you can please correct me, is that what happens to the person mentally? It has to be a heavy weight on anybody that has to come through that. Like, is there counseling that's set up for somebody what wants to come out? How does somebody come from that and then put themselves back into society is what we call normal? Like what happens mentally to people? And I'm not saying anybody's crazy. That's not what I mean. Meaning that it's really hard to get the Bible talks about your mind being transformed. How does somebody transform their mind from coming from being a victim, from coming from being controlled, manipulation? Those were some of the things we talked about tonight. What help is out there for somebody mentally, especially even with COVID going on? To me, that adds on top of it. What happens to them, Natasha?
All mental. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is all mental. You know, this whole idea of being sex trafficked has a serious mental component. Either, you know, you've been manipulated or you are not manipulated, you're very clear about what the situation is, and then just dealing with the toll and stress of the reality of your situation. And so I think any type of healing starts with the mind and like changing a person's heart and mind.
Yes.
And as Caitlin mentioned, there are tons of organizations that are doing this work, and they are the experts. And so they sort of create these services that really get to the mental health aspect of survivors of sex trafficking. I will say from a policy perspective, and this is something that I'm really passionate about, is making sure that mental health services are readily available for people.
Good.
Because oftentimes it's not. You can't just pick up a phone and speak to a psychiatrist or speak to a therapist. Sometimes it's really difficult for people to find that help that they need, for their mental health. And so I think there's been a lot of different policies, but continuing to push for policies that allow for accessibility, low cost or free mental health care, and to start early. I think it's important to have these conversations. Like, we should have these conversations in high school. We should talk to people about sex trafficking, and what that means, because the more we can sort of train the mind to think a certain way, the less likely a particular person is to find themselves in a situation that is foreign. So the more that we educate people early, I always believe in like proactive. And so there's tons of things that we can do when a person has already been sex trafficked, but what are we doing to prevent the sex trafficking from taking place in the first place? So that's some things that I think about, and the impacts.
That's powerful. That really is. Caitlin, what about down in Tampa? Like, to what Natasha's saying, are there those programs in place? I love the fact that we're talking about it from a mental standpoint that can help change the mindset. And before you answer, because when I think about it, I think about those sexual abuse, I think about physical abuse, emotional abuse. Some of those abusive behaviors or ways play a role. So in Tampa, is it those kinds of organizations as well, counseling available for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, talking about the center of the hub and all the spokes of the, there's so many pieces to it. Mental health, of course, is a huge one. A lot of the programs that I work with are, they're very intensive programs. So, they will have mental health services and counseling. They will ensure that women have transportation, women, kids, whoever is in the program, they have transportation to get to AA or NA. Not that every victim has, substance use issues, but it is very common. They will make sure that they have mentorship, talking about the renewing of your mind and just transforming of your mind. They will make sure that they have a mentor that they can connect with. They have these counseling services. They have another source of income, because if you think about, how does it happen? We've been talking about how does this happen? It's a means to an end. I needed a job. I needed to take care of my kids. I needed family. I needed a job. I needed to belong. So for a lot of people, especially if you start in a trafficking situation as a kid, this is the only way to make money that you know. So a lot of organizations will focus on job training skills. And so Created Women, for example, I was speaking about, they teach the women, how do you run your own business? Let's make soaps. Let's make body scrubs. Let's make jewelry. Let's go to the local markets and sell these things. They have a boutique to sell clothes and to teach women business skills and customer service skills. So I think that it is such a heavy situation, and it wears people down. It wears victims down, and it really brings them to a dark place. And so they need every single type of support that they can get in order to build up, job skills, mental health, healing, confidence in yourself, confidence in other people, confidence in men or women or whoever trafficked you. So I think it's a very holistic approach that needs to be taken to help these victims, return to normal life and normalcy, and people around them that don't treat them like a prostitute or like a hooker.
Right. Can I ask a question? How does trust get built back up again? because I know you both talk about the prevention, which is great. How does somebody build trust again, Natasha? It's just a big thing trying to build that trust. Say yourself and say you're out there in the community, and your voice. And I'm so grateful for your voice because I'm here in New York too. But how does somebody begin to trust again? Because I think, wouldn't that be like one of the first steps? And like to what Caitlin was talking about, the 7 points, wouldn't trust be like one of those major things where they would have to start?
Yeah, and I'm gonna let Caitlin, develop this a little bit more because I think she has a little bit more hands-on experience working directly with survivors. But yeah, it definitely starts with trust, and it does take time. I don't think it happens overnight. And I think that from my own experiences and what I've seen is, having and finding a person who they can actually trust and build that relationship with. It's, sometimes they bring themselves out of it, but what I've seen is, there's always that person or that catalyst moment that helps them to kind of regain the trust. But I'm sure Kaylin probably has more direct knowledge on the actual steps to that. But I 100% starts with trust and the person that they actually can feel like they can trust, because the trust is broken in so many ways.
So, Caitlin, thank you for that, Natasha. Can you chime in on that? How do survivors begin to trust again?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big piece of it is a leap of faith, right? Like, you spoke to your abuse. I myself am a rape survivor and a domestic violence survivor, and so I don't have the trafficking, layer on that, but it is a lot of manipulation. It is a lot of coercion, and so it is a lot of just breaking down. So it's a leap of faith. It is, being able to put your hope and put your trust in somebody else. And I think, speaking to what I needed to heal, because a lot, I have not been trafficked, and I can't imagine what that's like, but I know what it's like to feel stuck, to feel powerless, to feel manipulated. And you need consistency. You need people that are there and ready to talk to you. You need people that are going to be that rock for you, because nobody's ever been that for you. And so I think that is probably the biggest thing of, how are you building trust again? Is trust is broken immediately and it's rebuilt very slowly over time. And so that's why those programs are so intensive, and it's so important that the right pieces are in place, so that women can see, okay, I can trust my law enforcement. They're here to help. They're here actually advocating for me, not just arresting me. I can trust men. There are not all bad men out there that are wanting to, take advantage of me. I can trust, people that are here to help and they do want to help, or I can trust a faith-based leader, whatever it might be. It's just, I think, consistency over time is the best way to build trust for these women and these victims.
Yes, thank you for that, both of you ladies. You used the word, Caitlin, and I think Natasha and I both, of course, we heard it, powerless. When somebody feels powerless, it's debilitating. It's absolutely debilitating. So what can we do? Now, here, you two beautiful women, how can we use your voices? Corliss chimed in and she said maybe it should start in junior high school, preparing girls, preparing young boys about the possibility that, excuse me, something like that, anything can happen. How do we begin to prepare our students? Because I don't know if you guys go into schools. I know you talked about organizations, but how do we prepare students? Because students are in an environment, especially in a day like today, it is so different in the world. How do we prepare our students, Caitlin, and then Natasha, on how to be aware? I think the awareness is really where I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think definitely the awareness and speaking about it earlier, in as many settings as possible, because where are we going to reach kids? We're not going to reach them, in the streets. Maybe we'll reach them in church, but in schools. And I heard a speaker once. She was a survivor. She was having a rough time at home. she was at school, and there was an older student, a few years older than her, a senior, who began to speak to her. Hey, I have this man. You should meet him. He will, get your nails done. He'll buy you clothes. And I know you're having a hard time. If you need someone, we've got you. Like, we've got you. He'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. And it went that she was groomed and she became a victim at school. And so having those, and then it escalated. She went from being a 13-year-old girl at school to then being trafficked in a international cartel. So it just progressed over time. But it started at a school. It started because she didn't have a supportive home environment. It started because she didn't have a good friend support, and she didn't know what to look for. And so I think for awareness, starting early, I think, Natasha spoke to broken social systems, and it's such a complicated issue because it is related to foster care, it is related to policy, it is related to homelessness and drug addiction, and all these things make you more likely to become a victim of trafficking. And so I think awareness, talking about it, educating people, and volunteering in the community in one of those ways, because if you can touch the life and you can improve somebody's life in one of those, it reduces their likelihood and it takes away some of those risk factors that could bring them into trafficking. So I think especially the education piece is just so important.
Yeah. Natasha, if there was somebody that wanted to get out there and help in the community, here in New York or wherever, but in this case, New York, how would they get out there to help? How would they get out there to be a voice like you in a society that everything is silent, but yet you have people out there, children with a silent cry? How do we get out there?
Just start. I think a lot of people think that you have to have a certain type of expertise or, connections. You literally can just start. There's so many organizations. I think there's an organization, and I can look up the name and provide the name. I think it's called Restore NYC, but it's an organization that does work in sex trafficking. But that's just one organization. There's so many organizations that do this work. Google is our best friend. And you literally have to just Google something and all these organizations will pop up. Check out the organizations. A lot of times they recruit volunteers to help. A lot of times, the simple thing of like funding these actual organizations, so many people discredit this idea of like just sending a donation. Well, that is like helping because
Right.
these organizations need money to continue to fuel their cause. And so I always encourage people to think about what they're most passionate about, what really they feel drawn to, and look up organizations that are doing work to address this particular issue, and try to find an organization that you think resonates with you the most, and
Right.
become a volunteer of that organization, or like I said, donate to that organization, and just be a part of their work and uplifting what they're already doing. And it's so easy. Like right now you can go online and Google and find all of these organizations to possibly work with and just go ahead and do the thing.
Wow, that's good to know. And it's interesting because Corliss chimed in and she was saying that's what she wants to do. So, and I love this. Let me tell you why. Because you guys are sparking what's already in someone's heart. And I think that's so good when you see other people doing it. It just reminds them that they too can go out there and be a blessing to someone else. Stacy chimed in and said that what's going on, what you guys are talking about tonight is so needed. It's what's needed in a world like today, that we can get out there and help people that are going through what we're talking about. We're getting ready to wind down on the show, and I just wanted to let the two of you have some final remarks before we wind down. If there's somebody that's watching the show, this is going to be a replay. Of course, it might be a watch party. You're also going to be featured on the Inspired Living Network as well. What would you say first, Natasha? What would you say to somebody that's in trouble they know of somebody, the number is on the screen to National Human Trafficking Hotline for anybody that's watching tonight. And then I'll take Kayla. But what would you say, Natasha, to somebody that's listening to your voice tonight and they're in trouble, or they know somebody?
I would say that, it's okay, right? It's okay to be in trouble. I think a lot of what we discussed today is this lack of trust, this fear of being judged. So, it's okay that their situation is not unique. And they have all the power they need to get out of the situation. And as mentioned, the number is being presented here. And so reach out to that number. If you do have access to a computer, I know New York City government, if you're in New York City, they have different resources for people who are currently dealing in a situation of sex trafficking or being held against their will in any way. But know that there are resources and people in place that are really working to help you. And you have all that you need to just take that step in getting the help, but the help is there.
Thank you so much, Natasha. What about Caitlin? Last words that you can say to encourage somebody? Just anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna cry. It's just so
I know.
near and dear to
I
my
have to
heart.
tell you guys before you speak, Caitlin. I have to say, in this show, it really has. My heart is so heavy behind this. It is. But yeah, don't make me cry. Go ahead, Caitlin.
That's okay. I'm an embracer of the feelings of the tears. I think, I would tell someone that you are loved. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You have a God that loves you, that sees you. You have people that want to help you. There's passion, there's purpose behind all pain. I believe that. I believe that everything, has a purpose, even though it doesn't feel good. It feels icky. But everything that you are going through, or if you know somebody that's going through this, everything has an opportunity to help somebody else one day, or help 2 people, 10 people, 5 people. So there's hope, there's people. This is a topic that is being more and more talked about. People want to listen, they just don't know how. It's a weird, uncomfortable conversation. People don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But people want to know. And so I would just say, there's hope, that there's ears, there's always someone that will help. And, you're loved. You're loved. I think that anyone that has been stripped of their identity, of their purpose, of their control, of who they are because of going through such a horrible, heavy thing, that you don't have an identity, but there is purpose. Every single person on this planet has a purpose, and using your story for that one day, and using the resources you can.
Wow. Wow, I want to thank both of you tonight. Thank you so much for enlightening us, especially allowing us to get a different visual, if I can say that, to sex trafficking. It's not in the realm of somebody driving by, kidnapping you, taking you. And I'm so glad for what both of you said. You talked about some powerful things tonight about there are people that feel powerless, people that feel they don't have value. People that are caught up in something, not necessarily wanting to be caught up in it, but find themselves locked into something and don't know how to get out. And I'm so grateful that we have somebody here in New York, somebody in Florida that have a passion for seeing people and their lives to be put back together again. And I really feel in my heart of hearts that you really do have to have a passion to be able to go back and help people, or if you've never gone through anything like that, just to have the passion to go and enlighten people on understanding what the misconceptions are when it comes to sex trafficking. There are people out there that need us. So if you're listening to Real Talk tonight, be that voice. Be the listening ear. Sometimes people just need to know, like the ladies both stated tonight, they need to know that there's somebody out there that they can trust. There's somebody out there that they can lean on and depend on. There's somebody that they can step out there and cry and say, look, I need you. A lot of us have been in different situations in our life. We needed to know that somebody was there and we had that lending hand. These two ladies are absolutely remarkable. You're remarkable in what you're doing. Thank you so much for bringing to the forefront at Real Talk what survival is. When I say survival, survival for whatever you've gone through. It might, your story, Natasha, is not Caitlin's story, but then Caitlin's story is not yours, and your stories are not my stories. But we are three women that are on a platform tonight with some measure of surviving. With the help of God, we have survived some things in our lives, and we have to give other people the opportunity to do so. Thank you for being on Real Talk with Jean Price. Listen again, if you know somebody that needs help, you can contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. Thank you for joining me tonight. We will see you next time on Real Talk with Jean Price. Have a good night.
So often confuse sex trafficking with prostitution. Sex trafficking, as defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, is the exchange of a commercial sex act for anything of value through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. But in the case of minor victims, you do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. No child is ever a prostitute. Our brains have a very difficult time accepting that human trafficking can exist in our communities. When we are confronted with difficult situations, when we are feeling vulnerable, our brains need a story to help us understand how to protect ourselves. So my question to you tonight is, what is the story you tell yourself about human trafficking? Often, the story we tell ourselves is not my child, not my community. But I want this thought to resonate with you. Every child can be a victim of human trafficking. It does not matter their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic background, what community they live in, or what school they attend. All our children are at risk of being trafficked.